I have to say, do I sing the national anthem? All right, I'll skip the national anthem. Okay. Okay, I think it's 7 o'clock. All right? Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ann Kennedy, and I'm a member of the Tales of Cape Cod. Before we get into tonight's program, I do want to tell you that next week we have Mark McGrath. He's a trekker, and he's going to recount his foot travels across the Cape and relay to us the many people, monuments, stories that he's heard along the way. So that should be interesting. Tonight, our program is in celebration of our country. I mean, how more red, white, and blue can you get than baseball? Tonight's program is sponsored by Perry Wentworth, Elizabeth Donahue, and Charles McMillan. I want to give a special shout out to Helen Farrer, who put together our wonderful reception tonight. We do have hot dogs and beer and Cracker Jacks and popcorn and peanuts and apple pie, so please stay for that. I also want to thank Mary Jo Rubin for the cupcakes that you'll see that she did, and they look just like this. They look like little baseballs. So it's really cute. And I'd like to give a special welcome to Judy Scarafile, who's here with us tonight. Judy is the only woman that I believe is the only woman in the Baseball Hall of Fame. So. And she has a baseball field named after her. So, I mean, I was a counselor for 15 years, or 12 years, and they didn't even name the sewer after me, so. So the Cape Cod Baseball League is historic and special. Historic to our national fabric and special to the Cape. Here to share his relationship with the Cape Cod Baseball League, which his history dates back to the 1960s, is Bill Higgins, a former Cape Cod Times sports editor and writer. His association with the league begins when he was a young man in Harwich, and baseball remains his favorite sport, also my favorite sport. Bill Higgins joined the Cape Cod Times in 1973, and among his first assignments were to cover the league games. He spent his entire career at the Times, that's 43 years. One of his first dates with his now wife was at a 1980 game in Chatham, and she's a Yankee fan. Please welcome, I presume, a Red Sox fan, Bill Higgins.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you, Craig, for the presentation that hopefully I'll get through. A little video and some photographs of some famous Cape Cod Baseball League alumni that are now in the major leagues. And thank you all for coming tonight. I know it's a hot summer night, but it is an off night in the Cape Cod Baseball League, I believe, unless there's been some makeup games, but I don't think so. So in place of that, I'm proud and honored to have the opportunity to talk about the league and share some stories with you, and hopefully it'll be an interactive discussion. I can be accused of rambling and talking too much, so stop me at any point, ask me some questions, challenge me. We'll have a good discussion and have some fun. That's what we're here to do. As Ann said, baseball has been a huge part of my life, intertwined really since the time I was a little boy. I grew up in a baseball family. My mom was born in 1918, which was the last year the Red Sox had won a World Series until, this recent stretch over the last 20 years. So that was always kind of a symbolic thing in our family that she was technically alive the last time the Red Sox had won a World Series. And then my dad was born in 1919, and he'd always told me I was a day late and a dollar short, and I'm never going to live long enough to see the Red Sox win the World Series. Unfortunately, he never did. He passed away before the Red Sox started their run in 2004. But it was passed on to me. I'm the fifth of 5 children in my family, and the 4 ahead of me, a brother and 3 sisters, made me a baseball fan, kept me a sports fan. I loved baseball until I started seeing curveballs and my knees buckled, and so my dream of playing for the Red Sox wasn't going to happen. But fortunately, I was able to stay involved in sports through my career at the newspaper, and as Ann said, one of the first things I ever did was cover the Cape Cod Baseball League, really right out of high school in 1973, and fell in love with it because the Cape League is a gem, I think, that sometimes I might take for granted because I've been here all my life, and maybe some others do, but when you go out to the ballpark and you see just the ambiance and the innocence of it, to me it's like a Norman Rockwell painting that kind of comes to life, and there's just an innocence to it to me, and I always think that for the players it's like their last year of innocence. They're serious baseball players for sure. College baseball has become a very high-powered sport now in the NCAA. The players who come here are serious about it. They all have aspirations to move on and play professionally, but they're accessible still. They're not really caught up in the money of the game yet. The ballparks are so quaint and so accessible that you can literally, hear the chatter on the field. After the game, the players will hang around. They'll sign the autographs for the little kids. All the teams now have clinics during the day where the little kids can go and learn from what really are going to be big leaguers in another 2-3 years. So, like I said, there's just a charm to it that is something that I hope I don't take for granted, and I hope no one else does either. As I said, the other thing about the league that it's free. They pass the hat. There's nothing in life free anymore. But you can walk into the ballpark at any of the 10 ballparks around the Cape, and they would ask you to make a donation, and certainly it's a volunteer-run organization. It's amazing that they pull it off each summer because the host families take in 25 to 30 players, sometimes more because of the turnover, open their homes to the players, for the 8 weeks that they're here. The volunteers that, do all the grunt work behind the scenes, nobody gets paid. The league offices that work year-round, to put together the whole operation, it's really an astounding achievement that, they're saying, and I'll agree to a certain extent that this is the 100th anniversary of the Cape Cod Baseball League. But I really think that it goes back further than that, and we'll get into that. But before I ramble too much, I just wanted to play a video for you that I think will kind of capture a little bit of the essence of what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay. The video was just going to be a short clip, really, that kind of captures what I said, that the charm and that just the ambiance of the fields, how close they are, the fans are right on top of the action. The other thing about the league that's really, I think, special is that there's 10 teams, but there's only like 50 miles separating them from Wareham to Orleans. 3 of the teams play twilight games at 5 o'clock. Katuitt, Yarmouth, Denison, Brewster. The other 7 teams in the league, Wareham, Falmouth, Bourne, Hyannis, Harwich, Chatham, Orleans, play their games under the lights. So you can, and I have many times, literally see 2 games in one night. I'll go over to Katuitt for a few innings. I can stop at Hyannis and pick up the end of that game. I can hustle down to Harwich and see some of that game if I want. I can even stop and get an ice cream on the way, and I've been known to do that. So, and that, again, fans will do that. The baseball scouts who come here love that because they can cover the league, in a short period of time and see, 6 nights a week there were baseball games. They can see the players that they're looking for and evaluate them, in a short period of time and really get their work done. And again, what they're looking for when they come here are the players. Like I said, they're playing 6 nights a week, so night after night after night. Baseball is a grind, and baseball is a game of failure where you can go 0 for 4 and strike out 3 times tonight, but you get to play again tomorrow night. And the scouts like that because they want to see how players adapt and how they adjust and how they deal with that. Again, I have my preferences. I grew up in Harwich, so Harwich is always going to be a special field to me. But actually, if you put a gun to my head and ask me my favorite places to watch baseball in the Cape League, there would be 2 of them. Katuitt, because I think it's like an old-fashioned Wrigley Field. It's in a great village in the town of Barnstable. It's set almost like carved out of a forest. There's really nothing else around it. The village is again, right out of a Norman Rockwell painting. It's 5 o'clock games, it's twilight, the grass is real, there's just a specialness to it. My other favorite place, 1A and 1B, would be Chatham and Orleans. I love Chatham, again, because it's set right in the center of town. These are night games in Chatham, so they're 7 o'clock, so the pace is a little different. You can get an ice cream on Main Street. Again, I keep going back to the ice cream theme. You can get a slice of pizza or have an early dinner on Main Street, and Main Street is only a couple of blocks from the ballpark. It's set in an amphitheater. It's a wonderful setting for baseball. The only drawback is Chatham has fog. I was in Chatham last night for a ball game, and after 4 innings, the fog rolls in, as it often does sometimes on the lower Cape. You want to see? Okay, this is a pretty cool video.
Those that were here early did see it. Look back. Back me up on this, right?
That's really just a short snapshot of what the Cape League is. And there's a line, and it's not mine, and I won't take credit for it. It might have actually come from Willie Stargell, who was Hall of Fame baseball player with the Pirates. Again, it speaks, I think, to why we all love baseball. And the line is, when the umpire begins the game, he doesn't say work ball, he says play ball. And that I think kind of captures, again, the whole essence and flavor of the Cape League. So I was starting to tell you about my favorite ballparks. Katuitt for a day game, obviously.
Try it again?
You want to try the video again? It's good.
Best players
It's worth saying twice.
before they were selected first overall. Before they became postseason legends. Before they broke an 86-year curse. Before they made MLB history. Before they were named World Series MVPs. All their stories.
There you go.
Use the clicker, Bill, see, make sure it goes.
Here we go. So I'll give you a little preview, a little hint of what's to come before we finish up tonight. I'm going to ask a couple of trivia questions, and I have, thanks to Judy Scarafile, my great friend for 50 years, when we both started, or when I started in the Cape League. I think Judy started before me. But I have Cape Cod Baseball League 100th anniversary authentic baseballs that they're using this season, as commemorative balls celebrating the 100th anniversary. So I'm going to ask a couple of trivia questions at the end of my presentation, and I will, for correct answers, I'll give away the 2 baseballs. Judy and John Garner will not be eligible as so. But in that video, you saw well-known, famous Cape League players. Bill Miller had the base hit, I think, that knocked in the run when the Red Sox beat the Yankees in 2004, one of the great moments of my life. Then they went on to win the World Series. I think we saw Adley Rutschman from Baltimore, who was the #1 overall draft pick in the Major League Draft 3 or 4 years ago. We saw Aaron Judge, of course, even though he's a Yankee. We love him because he's a Cape League graduate and had that historic season last year for the Yankees. Trying to think who else we saw, but there were a lot of those players. Jeremy Pena, last year's World Series MVP when Houston won the World Series. So lots and lots of great players have come through here. And so that leads me to the historical nature of the league. They are saying that this is the 100th anniversary of the league, and it is. The league officially had 4 teams in 1923. I think it's, if I look at my notes and can read them, Chatham, Falmouth, Hyannis, and Osterville. Osterville is the only team that's still not part of the league. Chatham, Falmouth, and Hyannis, of course, are. But I like to trace the history back to the 1800s, 1885, and there is documentation, and it's valid, that there was baseball being played on Cape Cod in 1885. Cooperstown, home of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, has not a plaque, a poster in its archives advertising a game between Barnstable and Sandwich on July 4th, 1885. There was actually a round-trip train going from Hyannis to Sandwich to take people to a 3 o'clock game. So we have documentation that baseball was being played, in the 1800s, late 1800s, and it continued all the way through. There were different iterations and evolutions of the game. They were town team baseball. They were players, guys would work during the day. They'd play baseball at night. There were some barnstorming players that came in from off Cape. And in fact, in 1919, Pie Traynor, who was a member of the Cape Cod Baseball League Hall of Fame in 1919. So I would argue that we can document the Cape Cod Baseball League before 1923, but that's semantics. But in 1919, Pie Traynor, who was a native of Framingham, I think he grew up in Somerville, came down and actually played for Falmouth and Oak Bluffs. It was kind of a joint team, I think, if I remember my history correctly, and was a very good player, good enough to be inducted into the Cape Cod Baseball League Hall of Fame several years ago. And the next year, he went on to the Pittsburgh Pirates and became one of the great all-time third basemen in the history of Major League Baseball. So Pie Traynor is one of 5 players in the Cape Cod Baseball League, in the Major League Baseball League, Major League Baseball Hall of Fame who played in the Cape Cod Baseball League. The other 4 are more recent players that we might remember. Carlton Fisk, of course, is a Red Sox, hit the famous home run in 1975, played briefly in Orleans. The other 3 players are more modern day, I guess we would say. I've got them in my notes here. I'm going to find them, I promise. Jeff Bagwell played in Chatham. Craig Biggio played in Yarmouth Dennis. And Frank Thomas played in Orleans. So they joined, as I said, Carlton Fisk and Pie Traynor, 5 Cape League graduates in the Cooperstown Hall of Fame. The league, as I said, 1923 is certainly an official starting point. The other major starting point or major evolution of the league happens in 1963 when it becomes sanctioned by the NCAA as a college baseball league. And that's when teams in the league really started recruiting players from colleges, brought them in here. There were still local players playing in the league, several of them very good players, but there was a blend, and it continued to grow and grow and grow. Today, it's totally an all-collegiate league from across the country. I was in, as I said, in Chatham last night. There's a young man from Hawaii that is playing for Chatham. Not unusual. They come from across the country. They come from the baseball-rich schools in the Southwest and in the South. They come from New England. There are local players still that will play in the league, but they've got to be good enough. It's regarded, and rightly so, as the #1 collegiate baseball league in the country. And other people could correct me. John probably knows better than I, but I think there's probably 15 to 20 summer collegiate leagues in the country. But the Cape League is still the premier place. It's where everybody wants to come. It's where the scouts come to see the players, and the players come because they want to be seen by the scouts, and it continues to work. And because of the proximity, and because it's Cape Cod in the summertime, there's a lot of places you could play around the country. If you're good enough and you have the choice, there aren't many better places than Cape Cod in the summer to play. The other major change, I think, or evolution in the league that enhanced its status was in 1985 when they switched to wooden bats. A lot of college baseball prior to that were using aluminum bats. Of course, Major League Baseball has always been wooden bats. So there was a little bit of a dichotomy there as to how you evaluate players playing with aluminum bats, because the ball will jump off an aluminum bat a lot more than it will off a wooden bat. So pitchers' statistics would be skewed because they're facing hitters with aluminum bats. Hitters' statistics would be skewed also because they're getting an advantage of hitting with an aluminum bat. Fred Ebbett, at the time the commissioner of the league, and actually my high school baseball coach in Harwich back in the late 60s and 70s, really pushed, because he was a purist. And a lot of people felt if we're going to be the best baseball league in the country, we need to play the game the way the major leagues are playing the game. We need to play with wooden bats. It's an economic expense, wooden bats break, but they were able to pull it off. And the scouts loved it. And that really jump-started. Prior to that, there were lots of very good players in the league, lots of players that went on to the major leagues. I would argue, even with aluminum bats, they were able to evaluate the great players. A great player is a great player. But when they started using wooden bats, it really, I think, gave them a fair evaluation of what they were looking at in terms of players. And as I said earlier, the Major League Baseball draft is coming up actually this weekend. I believe it starts on Sunday. And there will be hundreds, probably dozens, maybe hundreds of former Cape League players that will be selected in the draft over the next Sunday. It's a 3-day draft. And in 2 to 3 years, in some cases shorter, those players will be in the major leagues. So let me jump. We started to see some pictures of some players, and I know I don't want to ramble too much, and you want to hear about some of the famous players that have come through here, and I'll show you some pictures of some of them and try to give you a little bit of a story on. Certainly we're looking at Aaron Judge. He might be the best player in Major League Baseball today. He's hurt right now, unfortunately, but last year, if you're a baseball fan, you'll know that he had an historic season. Hit 62 home runs for the Yankees, beat Roger Maris's record, was the MVP, was having a great year this year until he was hurt. He'll be back. He's an all-star, won't be able to play in next week's all-star game. But interestingly, when he played here in 2012 for Brewster, he's a big strapping man, 6'6", 6'7", very athletic, not just a slugger, a very good fielder. And he showed promise, but he didn't come down here and wow everybody. I looked up his stats the other day. In 32 games, he hit .270 with 5 home runs. That's not bad. It's a 42-game season. The other thing that he did, though, is every year the Cape League has a special day at Fenway Park where they shut down the league for the day. They all go to Fenway Park, the players, not necessarily the pitchers because they can't pitch, but they have a workout in front of scouts from across Major League Baseball. And so they're playing and working out in a Major League environment that's different than playing on a town field like they have here. The dimensions are the same. It's still 90 feet, from home to first and so forth. But the dimensions of a Major League ballpark and the setting of a Major League ballpark is just different. Aaron Judge, when he went up for that workout, put on a show, hitting balls over the green monster, hitting them into Lansdowne straight. And the scouts all knew he had Major League power watching him in Brewster, but he confirmed it when he went there. The other story that they tell about Aaron Judge, Matt Hyde, who was a regional scout for the Yankees, told me this story that down in Falmouth, they have in left field, beyond left field, and beyond left field, there's a pond. And nobody had ever hit baseballs into that pond except for George Foster, who was a great slugger for the Cincinnati Reds. He came down here for an old-timers game, still probably in his 40s and still strong as an ox. And he was hitting balls into that pond, and nobody had ever seen it. But Aaron Judge, doing batting practice, would hit him into that pond. So the next year, when he was eligible for the draft, he was selected by the Yankees. But again, interestingly, he was the 32nd player picked in that draft. As good as he is, and as I said, he might be arguably the best player in Major League Baseball, 31 players were selected before him. Some people will probably ask me, who were the 31? And I wish I could tell you. I'm sure there are some major leaguers in there. I know there are, and I'm sure there are some Cape leaguers in there. But the Yankees, I think, actually that year had 2 first-round draft picks, and they made a selection before they made Aaron Judge their second selection, but it worked out. So let me move on to our second player. This is Adley Rutschman. He's now with the Baltimore Orioles, will be the catcher for the American League in the All-Star game next week. And I told you that a lot of times players will come down here and the league will humble them. They're big stars in college baseball. He was a big star at Oregon State, but he was only a freshman. After his freshman year, he came down here. And Adley had all the tools. Scouts look, for the physical tools of throwing, running, power, speed, all those things. But he only hit 164 here. But they still knew that he was something special. 2 years later, he was the #1 overall pick in Major League Baseball. Not the 32nd like Aaron Judge. They could have chosen anybody. They chose Adley Rutschman. It's turned out he's one of the great young catchers in Major League Baseball today. This is Buck Showalter on the left. And interestingly, the man in the middle is Mike Curran, who was one of my mentors at the Cape Cod Times and the president of the Cape Cod Baseball League back in the 1970s. And on the right is Dick Sullivan, a beloved figure in the league, the commissioner, the president. He was everything to the league. Mike and I will digress just a little bit before I tell you about Nat Showalter. We called him Nat, they call him Buck now. But the Cape Cod Times and the Cape Cod Baseball League had an interesting relationship when I joined them back in the 70s. As I said, Mike was the assistant sports editor, but he was also the president of the Cape League. You would probably suggest that that might be a little bit of an ethical issue. The Cape Cod Times did a wonderful job covering the Cape League, and rightly so. It was the only game in town in the summer where the newspaper was in the business of covering high school sports. In the summer, of course, there were no high schools to cover, so the Cape League back then I think had 8 teams, and we were out there every night staffing all 4 of those games with the 8 teams. And Mike just did so much behind the scenes for the league. And the story about Nat Showalter, as I said, he was Nat when he played here. He was at Chipola Junior College in Florida when he came up here, kind of an unheralded player, but he wound up winning the batting championship, which is now named after Thurman Munson. Thurman Munson played in Chatham in 1967. Again, a legendary Yankee player. His life was cut short in 1979 when he died in the plane crash. He was such a great player here, hit .420 and won the batting championship, that they named the batting champion, going forward, the Thurman Munson Award. And Buck Showalter won the MVP that year. He won the batting championship. He did it all for the Hyannis Mets. And now, interestingly, he's the manager of the New York Mets. Never played in the major leagues, but he's been one of the great managers in baseball. Managed for 4 teams and not having a very good year with the Mets this year, but he's a very good manager. And back then, the Cape League players, a lot of them did day jobs. They would work in landscaping, they'd work in supermarkets, bundling groceries. They were real jobs, and they would work from 8 to 2 or 8 to 3, and then they'd go home, put on their uniform, and go play baseball. And that was how they made a few bucks. Not a lot, but they had to work, and that was one of the stipulations, that they had to have day jobs. Nat Showalter's day job was painting fences around the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. Not sure how good a painter he was. I know he was a very good baseball player, though. This guy doesn't look like that now. We remember Mo Vaughn as a big, slugging first baseman for the Red Sox and a really, really good player. When he came to Wareham in 1988, that's what he looked like. He was a Seton Hall player out of school in New Jersey. And he actually caught a little bit in the Cape League, but was a first baseman and went on to have a very good Major League Baseball career. Buster Posey is one of my all-time favorite players. He's not in the Cooperstown Hall of Fame yet, but I think he will be. When he was here for Yarmouth Dennis in, I think, 06 and 07, he came up here as a shortstop, but they wanted to convert him to a catcher. He was an athletic as can be player. To play shortstop, you have to be. He was also a relief pitcher. His first year here, I believe he played shortstop. His second year here, he was a relief pitcher and a catcher, but they were transitioning him and teaching him to be a catcher because he was so athletic and so good. And it was a game, I'm sure, again, John probably could correct me, but I believe I saw him take off the catching gear and come out as the relief pitcher and then close the game. He went on, signed, I think, a $6 or $7 million signing bonus with the San Francisco Giants, is the #1 draft pick. I think he led them to 3 World Series championships, was really the cornerstone of the Giants. And I think he's going to be in Cooperstown as a Hall of Famer. One of my favorite players, and just one of the real great ones. These 2 guys, you may not recognize them, but you'll know their names. This is the All-Star game, and I want to think it's, John will tell me, 93. Okay, the 93 All-Star game, and I think it's being played in Orleans. The batter actually is wearing the number he wore for the Red Sox, and you might recognize the whole swing. You probably recognize him before he got in the bat if he's fixing his gloves, Nomar Garciaparra. And the catcher for the Hyannis Mets, Jason Varitek. So those are two of the real showcase players that the Cape League has produced. Nomar obviously had a great career with the Red Sox. Varitek also. Interestingly, though, Nomar, I think, was the key to the Red Sox winning the World Series in 2004 because they traded him. The team was scuffling a little bit. He was a great player, no question about it. But the team needed some kind of a shakeup, and Theo Epstein pulled off a big trade in 2004, traded Nomar for Orlando Cabrera and maybe some other pieces to it. But that jump-started the team. The other thing that jump-started that World Series team for the Red Sox was Jason Varitek taking his catcher's mitt and stuffing it in Alex Rodriguez's face, which kind of, nothing like a good Red Sox-Yankee brawl. There have been several over the years. And that kind of, again, that as I said, I think Nomar was the key to them winning the World Series, but he was traded and wasn't part of it, but still a very important part of the Cape League history. Jason Varitek is still an important part of the Cape League history. He's with the Red Sox now as a bench coach, and I think someday he's going to be a manager, and it might not be too soon before he's the manager of the Red Sox. Another Red Sox player who unfortunately signed a big deal with the New York Yankees, but Jacoby Ellsbury was a really good player in Falmouth, was part of the Red Sox World Series team in 2013, and used and had 2 years before that, I think in 2011, had an MVP caliber season. Wasn't the MVP, but stole bases, hit for power, hit for average, did everything. And he showed those skills in Falmouth too. And he used his World Series championship and his great year with the Red Sox to sign a really big deal with the Yankees. $153 million they gave him. And he might have only played a year or a couple of years, got hurt a lot, never really turned out to be what he probably should have been. And maybe that's what you get for going to the Yankees. So. I'm sure I'm offending some Yankee fans here other than my wife, but it's all part of being a baseball fan. We'll all recognize this guy. He's now pitching for the Red Sox. Well, not so much. But Chris Sale, when he was here, came out of a nondescript small school, Florida Gulf Coast College, pitched for Yarmouth Dennis, pitched for the Red Sox, Yarmouth Dennis Red Sox, but they knew, the scouts knew that he was going to be something special. When he was here, he was the MVP of the All-Star game, and that All-Star game was actually played at Fenway Park. Back in the day, the All-Star game, the Red Sox would open up Fenway Park for an interleague All-Star game, and going way back when I first started covering the league and being part of the league along with Judy, they used to play an interleague All-Star game between the New York Atlantic Collegiate League and the Cape League, and we would alternate between Fenway Park and Yankee Stadium, which was pretty cool. One of my great thrills when I was a young man, still maybe a kid, is going down to Yankee Stadium and just being able to walk on the field. I mean, it's Yankee Stadium, so I wasn't as enamored with it as I would be Fenway Park. But still, Yankee Stadium is sacred ground, and this is the old Yankee Stadium, and I walked out to the monuments, and it was cool. But Chris Sale, his is an interesting story. When he played here in 2009 for Yarmouth Dennis, in 2010 he was in the big leagues. It happened that fast. It's rare. It hardly ever happens. Typically, you get drafted, you go to the minor leagues for 2 or 3 years, you improve, you learn your trade, and eventually you make it to the big leagues. He was that good. He was drafted by the Chicago White Sox in 2010, and he was so polished and so advanced that he came up late in that season as a relief pitcher with the White Sox, was eventually traded to the Red Sox, and was an important part of the 2018 World Series champion Red Sox team. Unfortunately, he's been snake bit with a lot of injuries. If you remember him, as I do, pitching in the league, he's had arm problems, and he's a tall, lanky, skinny, wiry guy with a really violent kind of motion. So he's had other types of injuries, but arm injuries have been part of it, and it's almost not surprising that he's kind of broken down, but he's had a really good major league career. Jackie Bradley Jr. was a Hyannis Met, a first-round draft pick out of South Carolina. Exceptional defensive player. I mean, he could catch everything. And was a good hitter, streaky hitter, but was an important player for the Red Sox, and also, again, part of the 2018 World Series team when the Red Sox won the World Series for the 4th time. By the way, the Yankees have won 1 World Series in the 2000s. The Red Sox have won 4. Just saying. Pete Alonso is your prototypical slugger. Can hit the ball, out of any park, probably Yellowstone Park too. He's just a real big, strong power hitter, and he was with Bourne when he played here. He's with the New York Mets now. He's going to be, well, I don't think he'll be in the All-Star game next week. He was selected, but he's been injured this year too. He's won the home run derby, the Major League Home Run Derby the past couple of years. And he showed off that kind of power here too. We saw this player in the video clip earlier, Jeremy Pena. I think he's a Rhode Island native, actually. But he played for the Houston Astros last year, was the MVP of the ALCS, and was the MVP of the World Series. Pretty good combination. Was a good player in Chatham. And last year's World Series, of course, was Houston and Philadelphia. And just to give you an indication of how Major League players are scattered everywhere, there's actually over 300 current major leaguers who are Cape League graduates playing in the major leagues today. It's close to 30% of all major league players, I think, are Cape League graduates. It's really astounding. But last year's World Series had 9 Phillies were Cape League graduates and 4 Astros. Unfortunately, Kyle Schwarber was on the Phillies. He was the MVP of the Cape League when he played in Wareham. He played here for 2 years. And he was a really nice player for the Red Sox for a short period of time. Unfortunately, we let him go to the Phillies. I'm not too happy with that decision. I think he would still help them, but he's a good player. And again, a prototypical slugger. And here's one that we have. Justin Turner plays for the Boston Red Sox now. He really had a great career with the Dodgers before we picked him up, but he's having a really nice year with the Red Sox, a real veteran kind of leader that the Red Sox could use. And he goes back, he's had a really long career. I think he's 39 years old now, and I think when he was here it was like 2005 or 2006, so he's had a very good career in Major League Baseball. Marcus Stroman is in the Cape Cod Baseball League Hall of Fame. He's in the Major League All-Star game next week. He's now pitching for the Chicago Cubs. I think he was with Toronto last year, maybe. But a Duke player, just a really a quality pitcher, and he showed that when he was here. The interesting thing about here, he played 2 years in the league in 2010 and 2011, never gave up an earned run. Pretty good trick. George Springer, another Wareham player, another Cape League All-Star. Had a very nice career with Houston and now playing with Toronto. And my final selection of the night, Alex Manoah. Not having a very good year, unfortunately. He's with Toronto. Last year he was a Cy Young Award finalist and was worthy of winning the award, but has really had a tough year this year, so much so that they demoted him to the minor leagues, which is unusual because he was one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball last year. But he was so out of sorts that they sent him back down to Florida at low level of minor league baseball just to try to get get his wits about him and get his game back into place. I mentioned the Major League Baseball All-Star Game next week. I won't run through all the players because some of them we've already seen up here. But next week's All-Star Game will have 16 players from the Cape League, current players, Cape League graduates, current players, 8 from the American League and 8 from the National League. So that really just speaks to how great this league is and what a feeder system it is for Major League Baseball and why all the good college players want to come here. Because if you can come here and you can cut the mustard, you know, Major League Baseball is going to give you a chance, and if you're good, you're going to get to play in the show. The Red Sox roster this year, again, just to, you know, give you an indication of what the league is all about, has 7 players who are Cape League graduates. Justin Turner, I mentioned, Garrett Whitlock, Jaron Duran, who has really found his game, I think, this year, Connor Wong, Chris Sale, I mentioned, Chris Murphy, Rob Refsnyder, and I mentioned Jason Varitek, a coach, and the Red Sox pitching coach is David Bush, who pitched in Chatham here. So I just want to give you a little bit of Red Sox thing, and remember we have a contest coming up, and I'll wrap this thing up because I know you might have some questions, and I want to give you a chance to be part of this. That the Red Sox, as I said, had 4 World Series championships in the last 20 years. Now, granted, they've been scuffling in the last few years. They've also finished last, I think, 4 times in the last 6 or 7 years, too. But we will only focus on the World Series championships. We waited so long for World Series championships in Boston that we've had 4 in the last 20 years. That's pretty good. But in 2004, I told you Nomar, I think, was one of the keys as part of the trade. Kevin Millar, we saw Bill Miller with the base hit to beat the Yankees in that game. Jason Varitek, of course, was on that team. In 2007, Mike Lowell, who played in Chatham, was the World Series MVP. In 2013, John Farrell, who was the manager of the team, actually pitched in the Cape League. His 2 sons, I believe, also pitched in the Cape League. He pitched in Falmouth. Jacoby Ellsbury, we saw, played on the 2013 World Series team. Chris Sale in 2018. Steve Pence played in Cotuit, was the MVP of the 2018 World Series. And Jackie Bradley, Mitch Moreland, and Joe Kelly were also Cape League graduates who played in the 2018 Red Sox World Series championship. Just a couple things in closing that I'd like to promote for you. Obviously, the Cape League will last until August 3rd, I think, is the end of the regular season. And then the playoffs will begin. There'll be 8 teams in the playoffs. So the season will be probably wrapped up by August 10th to 12th in there. So we've got another good solid month of baseball. They play 6 nights a week. As I said, the price is right. You know, it doesn't cost you anything. I would encourage you to throw a few bucks. The players walk through the crowds in many parks with a baseball helmet, and they're asking for donations. And it's a good thing to obviously support them. It's a volunteer-run league, and they could use all the help. But coming up is one of the showcases of the league is the All-Star Game at White House Field in Harwich on July 22nd. The playoffs, as I said, will begin August 4th. Next week, only next Wednesday, I believe it is, on July 12th, they're going to have a hot stove baseball discussion, and it's to support the Cape Cod Baseball League Hall of Fame. For many years, the Hall of Fame was at the JFK Museum in Hyannis. Downstairs there was a great setup with all the plaques and memorabilia and, you know, shirts and balls and just artifacts and trinkets from the league. Unfortunately, the Hall of Fame, I think, expanded, and the league has been without a home, but now they do have a home. They've rented a place down in South Yarmouth as part of the Moose Lodge. They have a portion of that facility, and they're going to have a function next Wednesday night with Peter Gammons, who is a legendary baseball journalist, lives on Cape Cod, great supporter of the Cape League, loves the league as much as anybody, has a great history with the league, can tell stories far better than I'm telling you tonight. And he's going to be one of the speakers along with Ron Darling. Ron Darling, a Cape League graduate, a World Series champion, broadcaster, I think now with the Mets, just a great friend and supporter of the league. They're going to kind of be the anchors of that hot stove discussion. It'll really be a good take. And that's going to support the fundraising that the Hall of Fame is doing to try to upgrade the facility, get it set up, put in a theater, get all the plaques set up, and really make it a first-class facility that will be the home to the Hall of Fame. And the first-class league, like the Cape League, deserves a first-class home for its Hall of Fame. And dovetailing nicely with that will be the Hall of Fame induction ceremony on November 19th. It's held at the Wequassett Inn in Howard. Again, it's highlights of the Cape League season, even though it's in the off-season. There'll be 6 inductees this year, 2 of them former Major League players, Lance Berkman and Glenn Davis, along with 4 other worthy inductees. And selfishly, I'll tell you, one of them is my brother, Jim Higgins, will be inducted. Jim was a long-time league officer, worked alongside Judy and John as a senior vice president, and gave so much of the league. And I'm proud to tell you that I brought him into the league in 2005 as an official scorer. When I was at the Cape Cod Times, he would summer up here. He was a teacher, and he would come up here and spend the summers with me. And he got involved in the league, was a very good baseball player, loved baseball, and gave more than 40 years to the league. So he'll be inducted also. So I'm going to ask you a couple of trivia questions, but first I would like to take any questions you have or any thoughts on the Cape League, and I'd be happy to try to answer any for you. Yes, sir.
How do the players get affiliated with different teams? Do the coaches of the teams know
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm remiss in not touching on that. The 10 teams are individually recruited by the 10 field managers. And in, I think, all cases, the 10 field managers come from college programs where they might be assistant coaches. In some cases, they may be, high school coaches. They have affiliations, obviously, with college baseball in one way or another. And they're responsible, along with some of the infrastructure of the league personnel. Each team has a general manager and people in the league who help the managers. But there's a networking system where the individual managers are well connected with college baseball coaches around the country, with scouts and everybody. Like I said, each team, I think it's a 25-man roster approximately. So there's 250 players. There's probably 500 or maybe more that want to play in the league. And they assemble the teams through the recommendations of the college coaches, the scouts, the network that they can, that they can trust. And they assemble, they got to recruit pitchers, they got to recruit infielders, relief pitchers, all the pieces that make up a baseball team. But they're all individually done by the individual franchises. Yes, sir.
I have a set of Cape Baseball League cards, which, as you know, are made 1 year. And as I understand the story, and obviously don't do that yet. What can you add to that story?
I think that's the 1988 team, I believe, of which we saw Mo Vaughn. And that 1988 class, I'm not going to remember all of them, but Chuck Knobloch is part of that. Bunch of major leaguers. John will know them off the top of his head, and I won't. But a lot of good major league players. That might have been one of the best years ever of the Cape League producing major league players. I think Major League Baseball, and you can correct me if they stepped in and said there's licensing agreements between using the images of players. Eventually, these players become part of the Players Association of Major League Baseball, and they may get their fingers on it. I know it's not connected to that particular issue, but several teams in the league had to change their nicknames. It used to be the Orleans Cardinals, for instance, and it used to be, I'm trying to remember, the Chatham Athletics. But Major League Baseball stepped in and said, we have trademark or licensing rights to the Cardinals because of the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Athletics because of the Oakland Athletics. And I should remember the other teams. YD kept the Red Sox. Howard kept the Mariners because they were the Mariners before the Seattle Mariners. But Major League Baseball, I think, again, my opinion, big-footed the league. I think they should have just basically said, you're good for us, we're good for you. The league, the Cape League and Major League Baseball has a great relationship. The league is always, the Major League Baseball has always provided some funding to the league. But they came in and they said, if you're going to use those nicknames, you're going to have to pay, I think, an exorbitant licensing fee to do that. So they were forced to change to the Orleans Firebirds and the Chatham Anglers and some of the other teams. I should remember the others, but the Hyannis Mets, yeah. I think the Hyannis Mets used to get their uniforms maybe as leftovers from the New York Mets. One time? $1 a year they paid for it. Yeah. So, any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Just very quickly, a statement of fact, the Red Sox are tied 1-1 and top of the third. In fact, a little bit of trivia we can answer. The tradition in Cape history was that parts of Katuitt and Mashpee were trading the Native Americans for kettles and hoes, and the kettleers came out of that. The other choice was the other choice for a name was probably referring to an older profession, but they could have been the hoes.
I've heard the story of Native Americans trading. I think I've read the history before, and I should know it better, but I think there is an authentic story of the Native Americans, maybe the Wampanoag tribe that was there way back when, trading a kettle, to the, not to the Pilgrims, but whoever it was that they were trading with. But I haven't heard the story about the host. That might not work either.
Are there any Asian Americans aside? I mean, they're obviously funny. Are there players that come over from Asia or even from Europe to play in the Cape League?
They would have to be in college baseball if they were going to. That's one of the other stipulations. I think it's still accurate that you have to be enrolled in you have to have college eligibility remaining to play in the Cape League. So, for instance, back in the day, there were really good high school players who maybe had graduated in June of their senior season of high school baseball who would play in the league. In fact, I know of some. One of my best friends did it. Peter Ford from Howard was in Boston College, played in the league. I don't think he played in high school, but there have been high school. But now I think you have to be enrolled in college, in a college program, in order to be eligible. So, for instance, the Dominican Republic produces lots of Major League Baseball players, but rarely are those players in college who then come to the Cape League. They sign out of the Dominican academies or where they come from out of their youth programs in the Dominican. But so, yes, there are probably European players or Canadian players, but they're playing college baseball in order to be in the league. So. Yes, ma'am.
Let's go back to the history a little bit. How many teams started in 1923? And then my other question is, just the logistics. Travel is not what it is today. They get on the school bus and they go. How did they play 6 nights a week like they do now? How did they get, obviously travel in 1923 was very different then.
Sure. Well, in 1923, there were only 4 teams. I think it was Osterville, Chatham, Falmouth. I've got it here. Hyannis. So logistically, the travel might have been a little bit easier between Hyannis and Osterville, for instance. When I first started covering the league in the 1970s, there weren't school buses. Now the teams travel by buses. There are safety reasons. You don't want kids driving individually in their cars back and forth from Wareham to Orleans. I mean, there were liability issues. So now there were a lot of safety issues enacted over the years. The league used to be split up into Lower Cape and Upper Cape. So Howard and Chatham and Orleans would be in the Lower Cape division, and the Upper Cape teams of Falmouth, Sagamore had a team, Wareham, Bourne, well, not Bourne was a late team into the league, but they would, so that logistically I think they kept the travel within the geographic region. When the playoffs began, then Orleans might travel to Falmouth, obviously, but yeah, now everybody's traveling, by buses, and it's a lot more, centralized and organized than it used to be. Trivia time? All right, let's see if I can come up with a couple and give away some baseballs. There'll probably be more than one right answer, so I'm going to have to be careful about this. Okay, name me one former Cape Leaguer who was in the Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame. Excuse me? Craig Biggio? Correct. You got a baseball. I've belabored this subject probably more than Yankee fans want to hear, but the Red Sox, as I said, have won 4 World Series since 2004. Name me 2 players out of any of those four teams who are Cape League graduates.
Ellsbury and
Tell me again?
Ellsbury and Veritek.
You got it. They told me I don't want to keep you from those snacks, and I would love to have one of those beers. But I'm going to just close with one comment. I mentioned Ron Darling, who's going to be at this function next week to help the Hall of Fame. And again, one of the real great players to come out of here and has been a great friend of the league. And his comment on the league, I think, really just sums up what the Cape League is all about and why we cherish it so much. And this was what Ron Darling said. My summer on the Cape in 1980 was the greatest summer I ever spent playing baseball. The Cape League has always blended the greatest amateur competition with the innocence and romance of the game. And that, I think, is the Cape Cod Baseball League. So thank you very much. Let's eat.